Welcome to step 4 in our Spaceship Blaster tutorial. If you've watched the tutorials up to this point, you'll know that we have our ships moving across, we have our projectile, we have some collisions happening, and the spaceship's flipping up and over. But now what we need to do is add some of the fun part, and that is add some effects and make our game look a little better. So what we're going to be doing is replacing our projectile with something that looks a little better and adding some effects once the ships are added, and just update the overall look to look more like a nice game that you want to play. So why don't we put our game glasses on and get started. All right. So if you remember where we left off with tutorial number 3, we'll just run the game just to see where we're at. And if you didn't see the other videos, you can go to my channel and watch those to see how we got up to this point. But we have our spaceships we made in Blender zooming across the screen. We have our controller moving across, and we're firing this boring old cube at the ships, and we have our collision with the ships. We have explosive force that's flipping the ship up and over and landing back on our grid. So first thing we're going to do is replace this plain old blue grid. The blue grid was nice in order to get perspective on sizes and positions of everything as we were working through all the game mechanics, but not what we want to do or use for our actual game. So what I did is I made a different material, this white grid. And again, these grids are just made with a PNG, can be made with any graphic editor, and all it is a black box with a white border. Pretty boring, but when we tile it, what we're going to do is I tiled it 20 by 20. So we're going to get 20 grids across and down on our plane. So let's grab that guy and drag it over. So now when we go to play, it looks a little better. Let it run. So instead of the blue grid, we have like a white grid. Looks a little better. It's a little light. I want it really be black in here. And why isn't it black? It's more of a gray because it's reflecting the light. So really what we have is we have two lights here. We have one light that's at the top shining down, lighting up our grid. And we have another light that is going from our position of where we're looking at, where our camera's at, and shining, basically lighting up our ships. Because these are in perfect 90-degree rotations, this light isn't going to affect our grid, and the top light is going to highlight the top of our ships, but not the front of our ships as it's facing us. So let's go to our white grid, and the reason we're getting that gray is that the specular highlights and reflections, we don't want any light reflection off of our material at all. So now when we play, you can see that instead of that gray, it's going to be more of a black. And that's really what I want for my look. So we got our background grid already looking a lot better. The ships show up a lot nicer against a black background. But we got to take care of this projectile first. Looks pretty boring. So what we're going to do is we're going to create, I want like a more of a laser bolt kind of look for our projectile. So what we're going to do first is we're going to come over here and we're going to create an empty object, and we're going to call it laser. An empty object, it has no mesh or anything. It's just empty. You can't see it on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a component here, and the component we're going to add is under effects. We're going to add a particle system. And so what this does is it shoots out particles. Now these are 2D bitmaps essentially. They have no 3D shape. And as you see, they're pink because they have no image that they're using. So what we're going to do here is we are going to set all of these settings in the particle system in order to get a more laser look. So there are lots and lots of settings in this particle system. We're not going to use all of them. It takes a lot to figure out what all these are used for. And it takes a lot of trial and error in order to get kind of the look you want. So we're gonna go through the steps to kind of make what we want a laser to look like. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna come into here and we are going to select a material, and we're just gonna pick the default particle, which as you can see is just a sphere that's solid in the middle and gets dimmer as we go out. So we have our particles coming out at the default settings. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to come up here at the top and we are going to set some of these settings. And again, it takes a lot of trial and error to kind of play around with these, and I'm not going to explain all the details of this, but I'm just going to go through and set all of them. So what we want to do is we're going to keep it looping for now just so we can see the effects as we go along. So what we're going to do is we are going to first of all, we're going to change our shape. I set that duration to 1, but I was thinking that it makes more sense once we set the shape to what we want. You can see what the effect of the other things are. So if we go into our shape, we want it to be a cone, but the angle is 25 degrees. And so what we want it to do is basically do 0 degrees. And what that's going to do is you can see now it's more of a straight line. It's a little wide. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the radius to something really small, 0.001. So now basically it's a straight line. I'm going to move this up so we can actually see it. So now it's already looking more like what we want, right? And so these particles are coming out at a certain speed. It's pretty fast, and they're only lasting a certain length. The lifetime is going to affect how long it is in combination with the speed. So the faster they go out, the faster they move across their lifespan. The shorter their lifespan, the quicker that they are going to be deleted. So we're going to be playing around with those in order to get the actual length we want. But it's already looking a lot better. So that pretty much does it for the shapes. We'll just collapse that. So we're going to come up here and we're going to change some of these settings up here. What we're going to do is we are going to change the start lifetime to 15. We are going to change the start speed to 3. Again, I took a lot of trial and error to figure out what all these were, and in order to get the look we want. Our start size, we are going to make it a little bigger. Actually 3, oh. Yes, start size, we are going to make 15. So you can see it just got a lot wider, and we're going to fix that with some of the other settings. So what we're going to do is we don't want it white. So we want the start color, we're going to make it a gradient. And I've already played around with this of what we want a gradient to be. So we can actually move this kind of over. Oops, I'm going to grab, don't want that. I want to grab this, move it over there. So what it's going to do is it's going to start out red and it's going to fade out to transparent. We're going to change this actually to red also because we don't want it to go to white. And we can change how quickly it goes in order to go from solid to transparent by changing these sliders. Again, you can play around with this to kind of get the look you want. I want it to stay solid red for a good chunk of the width. All right, so we got our color is going to be a gradient. So then what we're going to do is we're going to set our emission. So let's go to our emission. So this is really going to be the speed that the particles come out, and our emission of 10 is pretty good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the shape. Oh, we already changed the shape. We are going to, let's see, we got the render set, we got the shape, we got our emission. We are going to change our size over lifetime. So what we want really is it to be fat at the one end and kind of trail off and get skinny to the other end. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the size over lifetime. So that means that it's going to be fat on one end and skinny on the other end. So the leading edge of our laser bolt, we want fatter, and then the trailing edge to be narrower. And you can do this again. There's lots and lots of different ways of achieving this. So this isn't the only way, but in playing around with it, this is what I found could get the actual size that I want and the look that I want. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this render alignment to facing. So one thing is that these are 2D, and what they're going to, by doing facing, they're going to rotate in order to always have the bitmap be facing me, so which is what I want. So it's a little bit big and fat. So what we're going to do is we are going to come up here and we're going to go to the scale. So this is the scale of the overall object. We're going to do 0.1 in the X direction, and we are going to do 0.01 in the Y direction, and we are going to do 0.1 in the Z direction. So now it's a lot smaller. So, but now the particles are actually wider. We want them to be facing this orientation. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the Y to be 90 degrees. So now you can see that the lengths are all kind of blurring together in order to get one solid looking laser bolt, which is what we want. And it is facing in the Z direction. Remember, we want it to go out in the Z direction toward our ships that we're going to blast. All right. So we have our laser. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to create a folder. I'm going to call it effects in order to put our effects into. Oop, but I already have a folder called effects because I was playing around with this before. So we're just going to delete that guy because we don't need it. All right, so we have our effects folder. So we're going to drag our laser into the effects folder. And we are going to delete it off of our scene. Now we're going to go to our blaster. And if you remember, our blaster has a script in it that contains, oops, not the blaster. The blaster is the drawing. It's the controller is what we're moving back and forth, and it's shooting our projectiles. So right now our projectiles is that default missile. So we're going to replace that with our laser. All right. So now let's take a look. And nothing's coming out. Nothing's coming out because we're missing some things off of our laser bolt. So if we go back to our missile, the missile has a couple things. Besides the mesh, it also has a box collider and a rigid body, and it also has its script attached to it. So we got to do those same things for our laser. So let's go to our laser. Let's collapse this particle system. We're going to add some components. We're going to go to our physics. We're going to add our box collider. We're going to go to our physics again. We're going to add our rigid body. And we are going to turn off gravity because we don't want it to go sinking down. We just want it to shoot forward. And the one thing is on our box collider, let's open the prefab. Let's zoom in. Oops, we're going to have to change our look so we can get it a bit better. So if we go to our box collider and click this, what we can see is, I'm going to have to move around here to see it better. So our box collider is really tiny because it is taking the size of our empty object. So let's go to a top view. Let's go zoom in. So we're going to have to change the box collider to encompass our laser bolt. Just make it wider like that. Oops. Little squares are extremely hard to click on. All right, so now let's go to a side view. Let's stretch it this way. Oops, missed it again. Zoom in a bit more. I'm gonna grab that guy. There we go. If you remember, we had to make it kind of taller because the ships are not right on the grid. All right. So that looks pretty good. Let's get out of there. Let's save that. Let's go back to our laser. The other thing we need to do is on the collider, if you remember that we weren't letting the collider collide with the ships, we were just triggering something in our script in order to add our explosive force to flip our ships. So we add that. And now we have to add back up our projectile handler script, because that's where the code is that has the trigger code that's going to trigger the explosion of our ship. All right, so let's run that. And it is not showing up, and the reason is, all right, took a bit to figure out what was going on, and one thing I was missing is this pre-warm checkbox was not checked. So pre-warm starts the particle system all 100% going before it even appears on the screen, and without that, it takes a little bit of time for the particles to all appear on the screen, and our laser was moving while those particles were starting, so essentially we couldn't see our little laser bolt. So I checked that pre-warm checkbox on our laser. Now let's try it out. All right. A lot of different settings that have to be there. All right. So there's our little laser bolt. Looks pretty good. Again, maybe it could be bigger, maybe it could be brighter. There's lots of those settings that we can play around with, but already looks a lot better than our plain old big, our big cube. All right, so now we have our laser, we have our background grid. So now what we're gonna do is we want a little explosion effect, something that shows when we hit our ships. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create another empty object. Let's call it fireball. It's going to be a little fireball to show up on the screen. So let's set our position to 0, 0, 0 before we forget. 0, 0. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to add our effect to it. Effects. Oops. Actually, we don't want to do that. We want to add a component effect. Particle system. So it's going to take a bit more setting up in order to get our fireball looking good. So I am going to bring up something on my other screen because I have not memorized how to set all these things up. In order to get all of them set up correctly in a timely manner, I'm just looking at what I've set up before. Again, it took quite a bit of time of fiddling around with in order to get the kind of look you want because there's so many settings and all of them do different things. So it's not like you just come in here and the first time it just works. So we're gonna click our default particles, get those set. Going to come into here and set up our render, just looking at all of our sizes. So what we got is we got our minimum size and maximum size. So these sizes are going to change over lifetime, just like our laser. And what we need is how small can they be and how big can they be. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set these min and max. We're going to make the max really big, so it can be very large. So then we have a lot to play with as we change some of our other settings. So we're going to change this render alignment to facing again. All right, that looks looking good. All right, so let's collapse this and let's come into our shape. So instead of a cone shape for this one, what we're going to want to do is we want to have our shape, I'm going to change it to circle. I'm going to change it to circle, and then I'm going to change this arc to 180. So what we want is we want it to come up from the plane toward the ship, right, and out. So you can see how the particles are going to come up and out. So everything else looks pretty good here. I think we're going to keep everything else the same for our shape. What we're going to want to do is come into our emission. And our emission is basically how fast do these particles come out. So we're going to increase this to 200. So now you can see we're getting a lot more particles a lot faster than the defaults. All right, so we have our emission. So now what we're going to do is we're going to change our duration to be 1 second. We're going to change our start lifetime to be 1. So now they're only going to stay alive for 1 second. We're going to change our start speed to something a lot smaller, 0.2. So now what we have is we have a very dense cloud of our particles because they're coming out a lot slower and there's a lot of them. All right, so let's change our start size to 2. And then we're going to change this gravity modifier. We can play around with this. So basically it makes them kind of come out and start falling down. I'm going to want to play on awake. Yep, that's correct. Rigid body. Looks like everything else is going to stay the same. All right, so what we're going to do is It's pretty much of a solid blob here, which doesn't look all that great. We're going to change our start color. I don't even know if this matters as much because we're going to change the color over lifetime anyway, but we're going to start it out to be yellow. All right. So now what we're going to do is we are going to change our velocity over lifetime. So we're going to, as the lifetime is how long the particle is alive on the screen. So we're going to go to this velocity over lifetime. We're going to change some of these values. We're going to change each one of these to 0.5. All right. So now it's going to make them speed up a bit. Our speed modifier we're going to do to 0.5. Again, it just took a lot of trial and error to change some of these around to kind of get what we wanted to. I'm going to change the color over lifetime. Where'd it go? Where is that color over lifetime? There it is. So we're going to come in here and I'm going to start it out to be yellow. All right, yellow. And in between, I'm going to just click here to add another one. I'm going to change this to be more of a orangish. Again, can be really anything you want, just depends on the look you want. So now you can see we're starting to get a bit more of something that looks like a fireball with some of the colors changing again as particles are created and destroyed. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to change the size over lifetime. They're pretty big and they're all kind of blending together. And so what we want to do is we want to change those so that it starts out small and gets bigger. And you can see now that it's getting a bit more action to our look to be more of fireballish. So that's looking pretty good. So now what we're going to do is we don't want it to loop. What we're going to do is the explosion has to start out and then, so now when we play, we can see that we get kind of that explosion look that we're after. All right, so it's looking pretty good, but it's a little slow. So there is a couple more things we need to do. Just checking all my sizes here in order to make sure that I have everything set up correctly. So I'm going to want to change the scale a bit to be a little smaller. And once we get in our game, we're going to play around with some of these too. Again, it takes a lot of trial and error. We're looking at it just by itself, and once we get into the game and look at how it looks, we may want to play around with some of these things. All right. So it's going a little slow, so we got to kind of speed up the whole process has to be sped up and gone faster. So what we're going to do is we are going to do one more modification here. All right. So played around with it a bit, got it looking a bit better. So what I did is I changed the size over lifetime. Before it was a linear graph, and I want to start the sizes out really small and not get a lot bigger. So I limited the total size of the particles so we can see them a bit clearer. So now when we play it, what we can see is that we can see more of the individual particles. They don't all blend together because they're staying quite a bit smaller. And then what we can also do is if we change this rate, so we don't really need that many particles. There's quite a lot there. It's looking a little better. You can see a little bit more individual particles. And if we change the speed, let's speed them up a bit faster. So then they kind of spread out a bit more. So it looks a little better. Maybe let's go try a start speed of 1. Yeah, I kind of like that. All right. So our little explosion is looking pretty good. So let's grab that guy. Let's drag him over into our effects folder. All right. So now let's go to gonna bring up our particle script. So now what we want our particles, when we hit the ship, we need to create and instantiate our little fireball to appear on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our projectile handler script, and we are going to add a serialized field. It's going to be a game object, and let's call it fireball. All right. And what we're going to do is we are going to instantiate. And if you remember, here's this on trigger enter. This is the function that's going to be called once our projectile collides with a ship. So the other things we were doing, if you remember from the previous tutorials, is that we were grabbing the rigid body of the ship, the things we collided with, and we were adding this little explosive force to kind of blast the ship up and flip it around. So in addition to that, we're going to instantiate our fireball, and we are going to give it a position. The position we want is basically the position where we're at when we do the collision. So we were going to add our own position of the projectile, and if you remember, we need to add this rotation, which is going to be an identity quaternion, which adds no rotation. All right, so let's save that guy. Let's go back to our game. Oops, looks like we have an error here. Let's just build this to make sure that we ended that correctly. Oop, we've got our semicolon here. All right. Let's build that. All right, that built correctly. So let's go back here. Wait for it to get all set up with the new script. So let us select our controller, and we can see in our script now that that's our projectile laser. That's correct. We actually have to go to our laser. Let's collapse this guy, collapse this guy, collapse this guy, and we can see we have our fireball. We haven't assigned anybody to it yet, so let's grab our fireball we just created. Let's drag her over there, and let's see what it looks like. Hopefully it will work. It's all right. We are shooting our ships, but our fireball is not appearing. So let's figure out what's going on with that. All right. These things take a bit to always figure out. So what happened was our scale was pretty small. So it was 0.5. So it was showing up, it was just really, really tiny. So I made it a size scale 2. So let's make it 3. Just so it's a little bigger. Again, it takes some trial and error to play around with some of these things to figure out. Oh, doesn't look bad. So now we have our little explosions happening. We have our ships blowing up. there's some cleanup work that we have to do. We need to remember clean up our ships once they're blown up. Again, we could spend a bit more time making that explosion look a bit better to really figure out how we want it to look. But for now, I think this is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with our explosions. And the last thing we're going to do for our effects on our next video is to actually have our ships blow apart. Having them flip over is okay. I could just make them disappear, but I think having them kind of fly off in pieces would look pretty cool. So that's for the next time. So hang on for the next video and we'll be blowing apart these ships. And again, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Again, I have lots of steps along the way for this game, all on my channel. And as I do more tutorials, finish off this game. So after we blow apart the ships, I will be adding a scoreboard. We're not doing anything with the score yet to finish up this game tutorial. And hope you enjoyed this video. Again, give it a thumbs up and see you next time.